helpful to take a step back and to think about North Star. What is the thing that you're working towards? And you can translate that into a vision, which is you can describe what the future looks like when you've achieved movement in your North Star, and you can get into like the specifics of what the future looks like. The team or the person who understands the problem in the most amount of detail usually gets trusted to implement the most effective solution. So if you're trying to, let's just take activation or retention. If you're trying to improve product activation or product retention, typically the person who understands that the most eventually is going to be included in the solutioning. One of the biggest mistakes is assuming what worked at this other big successful company is going to work for us today. And the moment that you're in is, the ICP that you have and the channels that you've optimized, and the moment that you're in is really important, I've learned. So anytime you try to chase the success of someone else, instead of truly understanding the problem and your audience and, the fits that you have within the market and within the channels, nothing really works.
In scaling a B2B SaaS, growth too often becomes a game of experimentation, spraying and hoping something would actually stick. What if instead you build a growth operating system that becomes a repeatable, aligned and value-centric engine for your SaaS? My guest today is Andrew Capland. Andrew is a former growth leader. He's behind the No Guesswork Playbook, runs a podcast, builds a community, created a growth operating system, coaches and advises SaaS companies, all centered around delivering real sustainable value through growth. Today we'll dig into how to go from running growth hacks to moving to a growth operating system, and how founders can adopt growth discipline early, and what the key rituals, traps and mindsets are on that journey. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
We always like to start off with a bit of a story, I guess. So can you take us back to the moment where you first realized that tactics were just not gonna cut it anymore, and why did you decide to kind of build like a growth operating system?
I never wanted to. This isn't work that was fun or cool to talk about or felt like it'd be sexy to write LinkedIn content about. Like it never was that. But like many people who listen to this show, I got consumed learning more about growth. I watched all these old YouTube videos from the early 2010s era. I took Reforge in one of the first cohorts. And I just felt like every piece of content that I could consume about like how to grow faster and how to run a growth team, I read it. And I got to this point where I felt like I had a good idea about what to do or stuff that I wanted to do or stuff that other people had done that seemed to work, but I had trouble executing at my company. The content said, here's what you should do, but never said, here's what to do when you get pushback, or here's what to do when the engineer on your team doesn't understand why you're doing this or how to go about the work. And they didn't really explain how to summarize some of the technical jargon for like my C-level folks. And so I wasn't able to execute on all the stuff I was excited to execute on. And what I realized is that the ideas, they're not easy, but they're more straightforward. And execution and taking action on those ideas is everything. I eventually created this thing that I now call the growth operating system. At the time, it was just me trying to get some stuff done to help me actually take action on the things that I believed would be impactful.
Yeah, and I think that's nice. We always have so many ideas, but the actual execution, and you're going to run into roadblocks. Like I already hear some I run into myself. It's super funny. If we talk about a growth operating system, it started at the beginning. Like when should a SaaS founder even thinking about setting it up? Like should they be doing it early, or maybe start with tactics, worry about it later? Like what's your opinion here?
I think starting with tactics is good, right? It's hard to start a company in those early days. You're scrapping and clawing to try to survive. When you're in survival mode, you do what you got to do and you run from thing to thing until you start to get a little bit of momentum. But when you start to scale a team, and you have a more formalized strategy, and especially if there's like multiple teams that start collaborating on growth initiatives, that's usually the time. And it's sort of like this transition where an operating system can help you transition from, for lack of a better word, random acts of growth to a more coordinated system that has formalized learnings and checkpoints and artifacts you can onboard and train people on it quicker. That's usually a good time as you start to scale a little bit more.
Yeah, so really, I guess when you have multiple people anywhere in the company focusing on growth experiments. And when we look at the growth operating system, without going too much in depth already, like are there certain essential building blocks or frameworks? How does it look? What are the blocks?
Every growth team should have 2 documents. One of them should be your growth strategy, what you're doing, why you're doing it, what success looks like, resources, milestones, all that kind of stuff. And the second should be something that I call your growth operations manual, which is how you go about executing on the strategy and specifically problem solving for all the stuff that I just mentioned, 2 minutes ago. So what I'd like to include in that growth operations manual are things like, a KPI. There's some artifacts within that, like a KPI scorecard, how you're going to track success, maybe some experiments tracking things like that. Some rituals, which are outlining the specific meetings to plan the work, to review the results, to standardize the learnings. Some templates to help you execute and take action on the work, like experiment briefs and some of the weekly reports. Then frameworks that your team can use to make decisions so that as the leader, you don't have to make them all. So those might look like team values, prioritization frameworks and rubrics, and delegation guides, things like that. So a mix of artifacts, rituals, templates, and decision-making frameworks.
When you talk about the frameworks, if I go to your site and download the growth operating system, is everything, like, do you already have templates for that? Like, do I need to come up with everything myself?
So the way that I've outlined everything is I basically give the plug and play version of what I've created, and then I share the steps to help you customize it based on the size and scale of your organization, maybe the stage of growth that you're at today, and a few of the other levers that I've seen where you would customize. So yes, I designed the growth operating system. This is like my former operating system, but it's also the way I've coached over 75 different people that are leading other growth teams. So I've gotten to look kind of under the hood of a lot of these different teams. And I basically just formalized and shared all the stuff that I've been helping my clients do privately one-on-one in an asynchronous one-to-many way.
Nice. You dive deeper into the growth operation manual. When we go towards growth strategy, you start with mission, vision, mapping tactics. How do you recommend SaaS founders start with this? Not everybody has it fully lined out, right?
Most people don't. It's helpful to take a step back and to think about North Star. What is the thing that you're working towards? And you can translate that into a vision, which is you can describe what the future looks like when you've achieved movement in your North Star, and you can get into like the specifics of what the future looks like. You can take it one step further and think about what are the 2 or 3 different levers that you're going to need to pull and how you're going to need to pull to achieve that vision. And then think about a portfolio of bets that help you take action on those levers that ladder up to the vision. You can set some goals and milestones with that as well, so you can kind of share the progress proactively as you go on this journey. And that's what I like to do. It's a cascading thing from North Star to vision to levers, goals, from levers to bets, and then some milestones to help you track progress.
Yeah, I think everybody hopefully knows what a North Star metric is, but the North Star isn't just, hey, I want to get to 10 million ARR, right? That's not a North Star metric. Can you give us an example of what you think is a good North Star metric?
Yeah, the 10 million ARR would be a great company North Star. When you think about a growth team, it's like, what do you do to get to 10 million? Well, you got to do everything right. And so usually what you look for are inputs. So if you think about the model of the business, the spreadsheet of the business, obviously revenue is the output of a whole bunch of inputs. So what you look for is the highest signal input to that output metric, which for many growth teams usually looks like either retention or activation. Activation is new user retention, when new users experience the value for the first time in your product. Typically, when folks experience that value, they convert at much higher percentages versus those who don't. And then the same thing with retention, which helps you predict out either future likelihood to convert, upgrade, or expand. Those are 2 great North Star metrics my teams have used in the past.
One example people always use is the Facebook example, right? Like, how many friends did you need to invite when you joined Facebook? Like 7, was it? Or
yeah, it was like 7 friends in 5 days or something like that.
People have to figure out what is your SaaS for, what value it provides, and what you want them to do to actually get that value in the shortest time frame possible. And then figure out if the activation retention goes up, if they achieve it or not.
If you do a good job picking the right activation moment, usually you see a 5 to 6x more likelihood to convert over folks that don't. So if you're seeing folks that are activating by your definite, like an activation rate is an internal metric, right? It's not something customers or users know that they've done or haven't done. But if you're seeing that number go up, but you're not seeing more conversions or more long-term retention, probably it's the wrong metric, and you should probably go back and redefine it and question things at that level, because it should.
Yeah. For example, in our case, and I think there's many SaaS companies have the same, like we're a bit more technical, as in you would need to install a tracking script, you would need to install a snippet in the sign-up form, you need a developer, which goes into a development cycle. It's not as easy as signing up and getting value within 10 minutes or within an hour, because something needs to happen. Should the North Star metric be for the first time they sign up and they can already achieve something when they sign up? Or could it be something also indeed after maybe 2 weeks when they pulled in somebody to help them?
It's a great question. If you talk to 10 customers who are new paying customers that decided to pull out their credit card and work with you long term, and asked them all the same question. You said, hey, could you take us back in time? You've been with us. We're very happy to have you be a customer. When was the exact moment you really understood what this tool was all about and how you were going to use it to achieve your goals? Some flavor of that question. And typically what you see is different ways of describing more or less the same answer. When I saw my actual data and the way you could help me visualize and like whatever that answer is, usually that's your activation moment. It's a binary moment. Of course, there are milestones to get there, right? One milestone is they've got to create their account. Second milestone, they've got to get their script or code or whatever. Third milestone might be the engineer connects that and their first piece of data pipes through. At some point after that, there's a milestone where they get to actually use their data in a meaningful way, or use their information in a meaningful way when it's theirs. And that usually is the activation moment. If they do other things, it's good. But if we can get them to do that, it's more effort, takes a little longer, probably in your case, and with some of the developer tools and more technical tools. But that's usually a great signal.
Yeah, to focus on the output and what they want to achieve after all they need to do. Nice. You mentioned growth operating system implemented when the company is bigger. When that's the case, you often have non-growth teams like tech, product, or AV, CS. What role does every team play, or should every team play even a role in growth, even though they're traditional non-growth teams?
Every team in a traditional siloed organization has a different view of the customer and the value and on ways that you can achieve your goals. So I think they all can have input. There needs to be a final owner, decision maker, and rules for collaboration and things like that. But growth isn't a silo, right? So every function is learning different stuff. So when you think about like the sales team, if you have a sales team, whether you're a product-led company or a sales-led organization, they obviously know a ton about the users and the ideal customer profile and some of maybe the initial aha moments and things like that get folks excited when they see the product. You've got your customer success team. They know a lot about churn, churn signals and retention and things like that. You got product, which is going deep on the core value and some usage and maybe voice of the customer research and things. So the job of a growth leader is to pull all that stuff in and figure out first, before we get all those inputs, where do we see the biggest levers to pull? Second, who do we need to look at to help us put together wins and create a good, an effective portfolio of bets? That's the stage where really all these other teams part of that and be inputs.
Yeah. Any tips, advice on how to motivate people or get them into your team? Telling product, for example, we need to change this, and then next week you need to redo it again. It's not going to work well, right? Any advice?
I've learned a few things. One, the team or the person who understands the problem in the most amount of detail usually gets trusted to implement the most effective solution. So if you're trying to, let's just take activation or retention. If you're trying to improve product activation or product retention, typically the person who understands that the most eventually is going to be included in the solutioning. So I think the first step, identify one or two of the biggest problems that if the business were to solve, it'll grow faster. That will get you the executive level buy-in. And then how do I understand this more than anybody else? My own personal journey, I was a marketer, sick of getting people to sign up for a free plan and not use it. So I became obsessed with activation. Nobody else was using it. It was under the product team's umbrella. I was a marketer, not staying in my lane, but I was obsessed. I couldn't put it away. I was watching people sign up, signing up multiple times every day, going through the flow myself, taking notes on friction points where it seemed like I was getting stuck. I was looking inside of tools like Full Story and watching other people get stuck. I was looking at the cohort data and seeing, are there certain types of users that I had a problem, dude. I was obsessed. And so because of that, I started sharing that. And I wasn't sharing like, hey, product team, here's something for your roadmap. It was more like, hey, is anybody else seeing the same opportunity? And nobody else cared. Everybody was like, dude, we're focused on like making the new feature, the new integration. We don't have time for you, Andrew. And so eventually I called a meeting with some of the senior leadership team. And I was like, look, I'm a dummy. I'm just a marketer. But look what I've seen. I used Full Story. I had a list of like all these amazing companies that signed up for the product, experienced a crummy experience, left and never came back. Companies we would have been excited to put their logos on our, on our homepage or whatever. And as I showed them that, it was like this story that I started to tell through the recordings of all these people signing up, not experiencing that value. And then I pulled up the charts and I said, hey, look how often this happens. Look at the 2 or 3 stages where it seems to happen the most. And I just left it. Like I just shared the problem. I shared the immense detail that I knew about the problem. And then the mood of the room was like uncomfortable. Like the product leader was like shifted in their chair, or 2 co-founders at the time where, their arms were crossed. People were not happy about that meeting. And it was almost immediately after they said, hey, Andrew, why don't you share a couple ideas and just put it in the product backlog? You're not going to touch it. You're not involved in the solution. The product team will take it from there. That was kind of phase 1. For me, phase 2 was the product team would go off, they'd work on stuff, then they'd come back. Hey, did we fix it? We know you looked at the charts, you already got the dashboards. We made this change, did it work? And at first the answer was no, it didn't work. And so they'd be like, all right, want to come to our next brainstorm? We're gonna sit down with the designer and the UX person. We'll see if we can work on it together. And I was like, hell yeah, I want to be in that meeting. And so I started to do that. And then eventually I got to lead my own team fully autonomously to work on that project. And so for anybody listening to this, to me, the takeaway, understand the problem more than anybody else. Don't stay in your lane. Understand the problem, and eventually you will be trusted in part of the solution if it's an important enough problem. That's the building block here.
Yeah, and I think the only way to figure out if the problem is big enough is to start with the recordings, as you mentioned, then look at the cohorts, look at the data. Is it a common pattern? And then would a change actually make it worthwhile investing time into it? Nice. This podcast episode is brought to you by SaaStock, my personal favorite SaaS event and community. The Europe event is taking place on the 14th and 15th of October in Dublin, and it's going to be 2 full days of investor matchmaking, talks from other founders, and meetings, which will be a huge focus this year as they're planning to have over 15,000 pre-scheduled meetings before the event. As a listener, you're getting an exclusive 30% discount through the link in the show notes. If your company is already doing above 1 million ARR, you might even qualify for a completely free ticket while they last, plus up to 400 euros reimbursement towards your travel expenses. Discounted and free tickets are limited, so feel free to pause now, hit the link, buy your ticket or get your free ticket, and then I will see you in Dublin, as Redditus will have a booth there as well. So make sure you get your ticket and then come back to this episode. When you're in a team, maybe even as an employee within a company, right? Like how would you, if you take this example and then think like you're a SaaS founder right now. So you mentioned that SaaS founders were cross hands at the table, right? What could they have done? Should they have done something themselves to look into it? Or is it always part of the job of the growth leader?
That's a really good question. Up until a certain point, the founders are the growth leader. For early stage, like, before 1 or 2 million ARR, probably you don't have a head of growth, or you might have a head of growth, but probably you hired them to work on something very specific, a growth opportunity that you pre-identified. You hired someone to go execute or to go grab that opportunity. Later stage, when the founder is no longer the growth leader, these are usually unknown unknowns. At some point, somebody sees an opportunity and says, hey, I think we should go after this. This is the opportunity. Here's what good could look like. I modeled a few different outcomes. Here's how it affects it. At some point, somebody's got to do that. As the company scales, at some point, it can't be the founder, right? There's so many other things for the founder to do as the company gets product market fit and just has a broad set of challenges to kind of work on across the business. At some point, it becomes an unknown, and it should be the responsibility of the growth leader.
Makes sense. When we take growth as a whole, zoom out for a sec, you've been looking at different companies, right? You mentioned 75 companies. What are some of the common mistakes people or SaaS founders should listen to and avoid within their own business? Growth in general, maybe running experiments, maybe even also thinking about like implementing a growth operating system. You've probably seen many mistakes happening. On your LinkedIn, you said you made millions of mistakes, or you at least see them happening. Tell us some common ones.
I think a few of the mistakes that I see are really not understanding the problem in enough detail. And in the world that we're in right now with LinkedIn and social media, there's a pressure to do what everyone else is doing, what they're seeing work. And I think one of the biggest mistakes is assuming what worked at this other big successful company is going to work for us today. And the moment that you're in is, the ICP that you have and the channels that you've optimized, and the moment that you're in is really important, I've learned. So anytime you try to chase the success of someone else, instead of truly understanding the problem and your audience and, the fits that you have within the market and within the channels, nothing really works. And you'd go from idea to idea and you'd float around. It's truly understanding the problem in immense detail in the moment that you're in. Usually if you can understand that, the solutions, they're not obvious, but they'll show themselves to you.
Nowadays you have all the growth hacks that's happening for years where people share like, hey, we changed this on the site and then suddenly we saw a 20% increase in conversion. Yeah. It's not that you can simply copy and paste it.
And dude, I'm guilty of this as well. At Postscript, my last in-house gig, founders were passing around, or there was some Google Doc that was open source, it was open to the public, that got passed around. It was how Airbnb built their referral program. It's like a 40-page Google Doc. I bet if you Google it today, we could find it. But I read that and it was like, oh, well, now I have the playbook. I know exactly how to do it. I know exactly how they did it. This was one of their largest growth levers. I'm going to build it. And so I pitched it to the team. They were like, yeah, dude, go get it. That's dope. So I built it. I spent a couple months building it, grabbed a couple engineers, a designer. We made this really amazing experience. There was like a little piggy bank when you made a referral. It was like it dropped a quarter in the bank. It had fun animations. It was in the tool. I was swagging. Like after we built that, I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is going to change everything. I'm going to look like a hero. And it flopped. And I followed the instructions. I did exactly what the Airbnb guide said to do, and it just didn't work. And it was the wrong solution to the wrong problem. It was the wrong fit for that. And so even when you think you know better, sometimes you can't get your hand out of the cookie jar when the cookies look too good. It's like, that looked so sweet the way they teed that up in that doc.
Yeah, but that's the fun part, I guess. Writing something like that wouldn't work. You can't just copy and paste certain things. And
dude, I wish you could. It would have been way easier.
Yeah. It's
I think that's the challenge nowadays in like this GPT environment that we're in is getting ideas has never been easier. There's never been more amazing ideas, access to this information. But finding the right problem to solve, that actually is the most important skill. And then maybe having the ability to evaluate and execute on the solutions is the next most important thing. And that's a lot of what I spend my time on these days.
Yeah, I think that's it. We all have problems we want to solve, but actually doing it and prioritizing the ones you need to solve, I think that's the most fun part as well, like actually going into it. Well, you mentioned the referral program, right? It's a nice one. So you spent a lot of time on it. This is also part of being in a growth team, that not everything works out as you want it. How do you manage your confidence or manage even like expectations within the company when such a big project where you had so high expectations completely flopped?
Two things can be helpful. One is a mindset. So for me personally, like if you work in growth, you're a head case. Like all the people who I spend my days with, they're all on edge, only as valuable as their most recent win. They all have hits to their ego every time you get excited about something that doesn't work out. We're a fragile bunch, us growth leaders. I say that with love because that's me as well. So one of the things that I do for my mind is I keep something, I call it a trophy file. I do it daily. I've done this for years. My old coach had me do this because I hired a coach because I was feeling fragile and I was feeling lost and unvaluable. This is something that she had me do that's changed my life that I share with everybody. So every single day, I add 3 trophies to my file. File is maybe a little dramatic. It's an Evernote document, an Evernote note that I've had for 10 years, where every day I put 3 bullet points or a screenshot or a kind thank you. Somebody said 3 things to remind myself, regardless of what happens and what outcomes I drive, here's the value that I brought today. Here's some evidence I am who I think I am. I do that every day. That helps with me. One of the other things that you can do is tactically, when you're working on a project, before you start it, in addition to writing out, here's my hypothesis, here's what good looks like, here's the design of the thing I'm working on, I like to write out, if this works, here's what we learned from it. Here's our next step based on that learning. Here's what else I need to tell so we can squeeze all the juice out of this learning. If I'm wrong, here's what we learned from it. Here's the value that we get from that learning. Here's what we'll do next and who I should let know on other teams based on that learning. So it almost helps you get, like I think about working in growth, you're like a chief learning and enablement vehicle for the company. So win, lose, or draw, you're learning stuff that should help other teams make more efficient decisions, which should help you get to the center of the bullseye faster. So those are 2 things that I do, one for the mind, one for the OS, I found to be really helpful.
Yeah, keep in mind the wins, the trophy file. And when you talk about, I guess, the experiments, right? Keep track of what you learned from the experiments. It was also in the growth operation manual. You probably leverage AI in that now, right? Run so many experiments. How do you leverage that?
I love this question. I'll share what I do in my business, and then I'll share what I would do if I was still in-house today and what I advise my clients. In my business, I work as a coach and as an advisor. I'm a creator. I've got my own podcast. I send out a weekly podcast with a YouTube video and an email to my list. Everything that I do an A/B test with. So every YouTube video, I'm running an A/B. Every email that I send through Substack, I'm doing an A/B. And I have a long list inside of a Google spreadsheet of every test I ran, a quick note on like what I was hoping to learn, the results, and why I thought that we had the results that we had. And then now I use that, I've like kind of used that to train my AI on my audience and my content and the reactions that I've gotten and the engagement from that. And now before I write any new video, new email, even some of my LinkedIn posts, I'll write like the hook. And if it's like an image, what type of image, and then the engagement that it got, it just helps me to hone in on what good is faster. And so that's exactly what I encourage my clients to do. They're running a lot of A/B tests today. Make sure you're documenting stuff, create a brief for every experiment, have a master sheet where you're tracking the results of every brief and every test that you've run, and then train AI on what works and doesn't work within your business and the context and the moment and the channels that you're experimenting in. And what I like to do is to then, before I run my next A/B test, ask GPT, hey, based on my previous results, what do you predict will happen? And I would say, if you train it on enough data points, it's probably right 6 out of 10 times, like 60%. Like the hit rate is not 100%, but my personal hit rate, like Andrew's hit rate, is like 10%. Like whatever I thought was going to happen, never happened. We've dramatically increased our hit rate, and over time, that will continue to get better. Forget what the most popular growth minds are doing. Forget what worked at Canva and Miro. Let's figure out what works at our company with our audience and channels. That's how the next generation wins.
Yeah, indeed, it doesn't have to be super tricky, right? You use ChatGPT. Where did you have the master document? Like in Google Docs? Or?
Yeah, is it a Google spreadsheet? Yeah, I screenshot it. I've thought about moving it to Google or Google Notebook just so I don't have to update it. At some point I will, but for today, it works incredible.
Yeah, don't overcomplicate things. Put it in a document somewhere and then just feed it and then go from there.
Which if we go back, one of the most important things that every team should be doing is documenting, right? So that's a huge part of this next generation's operating system, because without documentation, you're just doing stuff and you're not actually learning from it. If you can't learn from it, you can't get better over time, and really you're just wasting time. So that to me is like the input there. It's like documenting.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but even for myself, I run so many things. We're not a huge team, so at one point documentation is not a huge priority. But if we would, and we probably should, starting next week, we can actually train also people which come on board, right? Like, hey, these are all the things we actually have been doing, what has been working, and they can kind of just ask the AI what happened before I joined the team, for example.
Totally. From a founder perspective, nowadays, how long does the average employee stay on? Right? Maybe 2.5 years. If you're great, a small number of employees will stay a long time, but the vast majority stay for a few years. And so you get them for a couple of years, which means there's always losing of context and historical information. To me, that artifact is really important.
Yeah, so I think this ties well to my next question. What should a founder think about before hiring their first growth lead? Documentation. Yeah. What else should they be thinking about, I guess, so they can really empower their first growth hire from day one?
So there's a few inputs here. I think one is it's helpful to understand what kind of growth leader your company needs. I come from the marketing side of growth. Obviously, I've worked my way into the product side, but in my 15-year career, the first half of it, I was a marketer. And so at a company that has acquisition challenges, someone with my background and skill set would be a great first hire. If you've got the flip side, which is like, hey, our acquisition engine is humming, what we really need to work on is retention and monetization and conversion inside of the product, then obviously bringing someone on board that has that skill set and that background will be a fit. So there are different types of growth titles, and I think figuring out the right skill set, company challenge match to me is an important first step. I think when hiring that person, obviously you want to look for folks who are learners, that are curious, that have demonstrated the ability to solve many problems, and that have frameworks to solve the problems. Because at every company, there's going to be new problems that nobody knows how to solve. And so there are some folks that have experience solving very specific problems, and they know the answers to those, and they can say the answers to those quickly. But what if the context isn't the exact same at your company? It's not going to be. And if they don't have a system that led them to the answer, they just got lucky guessing and they checked and it turned out that it worked, that's not going to be someone that's going to help you get to the next level. So that's really important. One of the most underrated skill sets in growth is the ability to translate technical growth jargon. The space is full of jargon and acronyms for non-native speakers. Someone who knows what to do and why to do it and can explain it to folks that have no idea what's paramount to this work. For both the founder and the growth leader, before you get started, I like to go really slow and clarify and verify, what does growth own? What are they accountable for? Who should they collaborate with on other projects? And that's a conversation. Like, both sides should bring a POV on that. When I coach folks, and the story at the beginning of our coaching engagement isn't like, hey, things are going perfectly. If it's not going perfectly, it's almost always, I don't really know what growth is. My boss hasn't done my job before, and I think it should be this, but I don't think they have that impression. They're always telling me to do this other thing, and I keep explaining it to them, but they don't understand. The root cause is always a lack of alignment on ownership and accountability.
Yeah. I went to the growth conference in Amsterdam, and there were a lot of people, of course, and I think that was one of the biggest things as well. Like, people don't understand, or often their company doesn't understand what growth actually does.
If you don't have that, and then you get hired into a role and you're all excited and you're like, oh, I'm going to be the head of growth here, but you're not on the same page, there's no way you can be successful, right? That's going to be tough.
Yeah. And at the beginning you said hire somebody with the skill set for a problem. Like, that's, I guess, also comes back to what you said before, right? Like, not understanding the problem in detail. So really make sure somebody understands the problem you're trying to fix. So if you're thinking about hiring somebody, first think about what are your problems and then try to find somebody with the skill set there.
Yeah. I think about a lot of the work that I do. It's at the most valuable work I do is the first 20% of a project and the last 10%. Meaning the first 20% is, what's the problem that we need to solve? If we solve it, what impact does it have on the business? There are many different ways we could solve this problem. What would be the best one for us, aligned with the resources that we realistically have available? Like, the scoping and the problem identification part of it is so important. And then on the tail end, did we do it? Right? So like we did something, we had an idea, we thought it would be impactful. We did it. Did it work out? How can we hold ourselves accountable? I think if you can be really exceptional at finding problems and brainstorming effective solutions and prioritizing the right bets, it's just a matter of time till you get it. And so you've got a system that will lead you to the answer more so than hoping you figured it out or hoping you guessed right. That's a lot of my work today. Beginning 20, the last 10%.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If we look at our own journey, sometimes we know things are broken, so we just implement a fix, I guess, assuming that it is going to actually fix things, but we never measure the actual effect because we're probably not big enough to measure everything and go from one problem to another. When I think about it, we don't write anything down. We don't know if it actually fixed certain things. I think this is happening more than just in our company.
Yeah. Dude, it happens everywhere. And what's interesting, something you could think about would be if you're and for any founder, if you're at an organization where you don't have enough statistical weight to lean on quantitative for like every single decision that you're going to make, use the qualitative. Do some user testing, do a little bit of user research. Like that has been so helpful in my journey and when I've been in-house and when I coach or advise companies that are early stage. That's okay. Like everybody, like the SaaS community puts a ton of weight on the data. Like data is a very valuable currency, but the quantitative isn't the only kind, right? The qualitative is so helpful. So I like to do that. Like if you were working on an acquisition challenge and you don't have enough data to run an A/B test, or if you ran an A/B test, it might take you 2 months to get statistically valid, results. Show a version of it to 10 people. Ask them what they think the next step is. Ask them what might stop them from clicking on your CTA or taking the next step. They'll probably all say similar answers to the same root cause. Go fix that thing and then ask 10 other people based on the new design, the same question, and probably they'll give you a different answer. And that would be a good feedback loop. You can do that in any area of the tool, any area of the user journey. Good stuff.
Yeah, and even as you mentioned before, like watching recordings could even give you feedback without having to jump on a call. Like I don't care, but I know a lot of people don't want to jump always on calls or they can't get people on a call. So that would give you a lot of insights.
And there's also tools for that. So you could use I grew up using usertesting.com, which is a platform you can show people an experience and then ask them to answer questions verbally out loud. And it sends you a screen recording and an audio recording. There's a whole bunch of other tools in that space that do user research, user testing at scale without you having to manage everything one-to-one that are just like SaaS platforms. I love those options.
Yeah, every experiment is different, but I guess like when we look at product activation, maybe even retention, like any tools you would recommend here, like for example, we just switched over to post hoc. So we kind of maybe even gonna drop Google Analytics at one point so we can have everything in one place. Like you advise over 75 clients, right? Like if you go in and have a new client and they haven't set up any systems, like what will be the first thing you would set up or you would almost require them to install for you to be able to do your work?
Probably 3 categories of tools. They'll need some type of CRM marketing automation tool. So like a HubSpot-esque tool so they can communicate to customers in an email channel and track stuff and get some basic level reporting. Second would be a little bit more advanced reporting, a post hog, maybe a Mixpanel or an Amplitude for larger organizations, things like that. And then the third would be some way to communicate, assuming it's a SaaS company, some way to communicate to customers inside of the product. Especially if you're early stage, you're not going to have the resources to make a ton of product changes in the early days. So having some way you can communicate one-to-many or even one-to-one to users of your product to gather feedback, to let them know about updates, to whatever it might be will be incredibly helpful. And for that, I really Pendo might be not a great fit for really early stage, but even an intercom would be a great first step and a place to start, or an app queues or something like that. Those are all great options for that category.
Yeah, nice. If we look at the future, say 2 to 3 years, what should SaaS founders prepare for when it comes to growing their SaaS company? You can take it as broad as you want.
Yeah. Train the AI on your proprietary data so that you can leverage that data and query it to make future decisions. That to me is the playbook. Who knows where the technology will lead us? Who knows what new channels are going to emerge? That stuff is ever changing. What isn't going to be changing are the results and the learnings that you get from your audience. So that's what I'd be doing. I'd be documenting why I'm doing things and the results of those things, whether it's an A/B test or a new program or a new bet that we might be taking internally. Train my AI on those results and then query my AI to ask it to predict the results of the next thing that I'm working on. If you got 2 or 3 years of that data, you should be hitting a lot of home runs.
Yeah, because in the end, garbage in, garbage out. So if you start documenting everything, you can't query everything. But if you don't do it and you just come up with it later, it's not going to work.
We're all querying stuff today, right? When you ask for my opinion, I'm literally just querying my own experience and saying, well, I think this based on what I've seen. But most of us are wrong. or we're so biased, or we saw something one time, we read something from someone that we really respect and we just over-index to that, the AI doesn't over-index, just looks at the facts.
Yeah, more specifically facts which happened within your company, right? Because, for example, we have 150 podcast episodes. If we train an AI based on a transcript, you can ask them like, hey, give me 5 growth hacks. It doesn't actually mean it's going to work for your SaaS business. So I think this is a really important one. Cool. Let's wrap things up. Final 2 questions. Again, you can take it as broad as you want, but this is going to go into revenue stages. What kind of advice would you give a SaaS founder who's just starting out and now growing from 0 to 10K monthly recurring revenue?
At this stage, I'd be looking for one channel that works really well for acquisition and one communication channel that drives retention. I would keep it very basic in the early stages. That's what you need. Obviously, you're not going to really have a lot of conviction on the right way to position the product. You're not going to have a ton of data on A/B test, none of that stuff, right? If we can get customers in, leverage one channel in the early days. There's different channels. Part of the early process is finding the one, and then really see if you can perfect one acquisition channel, one retention channel, and that'll get you going.
Yeah, first find the one and keep focusing on the one, which is actually getting it.
You can scale a big business on one channel.
Yeah, I agree. As long as I keep focusing on it and not be too distracted on other things. We're going to make a huge step. I know we're going to go from 10K MOR towards 10 million ARR. Again, you can do however you want. You can chop it up. But what kind of advice would you give SaaS founders here?
All right. On this journey, I think that there's 2 components that are really, really important. The first is going to be new user onboarding. So that new user experience at this stage typically becomes much more valuable. So at this stage, if we think about the revenue as a proxy, we've got some momentum in the market. We've maybe got the inklings of a product market fit, and it's time to start optimizing a little bit. So what we want to do is really pay attention to that new user experience, because every additional user we can retain is going to compound over time. So I'd pay attention to the new user activation and onboarding experience. And when I hit plateaus, I would really be leaning on segmentation in any area of my growth model. So if I'm starting to hit the point of diminishing returns on the acquisition side, I want to lean on different segments within the channel I can optimize for. So either different goals or different jobs to be done or different titles or verticals, personas, whatever it might be. Same thing inside of the product. So if I'm hitting conversion plateaus, either in activation or in conversion from active user to paying customer, I want to really be thinking about what are the different ways I can slice and dice this database? How can I communicate differently to those folks in here? And what we've learned in other areas is that segmentation usually helps you break through those conversion plateaus. I'd really lean on those 2 things.
Slice and dice the data. Love it. Let me see if I can try to summarize. So when we go back to the beginning, the growth operating system, building teams that deliver real value, execution is everything. When you're early stage, start with tactics. When you're in survival mode, so don't care about the growth operating system, only care about it when you actually have multiple people. When you are going to implement it, there's basically 2 layers, like the growth strategy. So start with a North Star metric, get like a highest signal input for the output you're trying to deliver, and then of course set up goals, milestones, your mission and your vision, but go into the document to look deeper into that. When you go to the growth operations manual, think about KPIs, scorecards, experiment tracking, rituals, templates, frameworks to make decisions. You don't have to come up with everything, just go to the template from Andrew. If you're a founder and you don't know what to focus on, try to find your 2 biggest growth problems and then figure out like how can you solve them. If you're a person within a company and you want to be involved in growth, make sure you actually understand the problem the most, and then you will be involved in the experiments. Like that's how Andrew got involved, because you need to understand the problem in detail. Like that's one of the most typical problems which are happening right now. Growth, if you want to keep sanity, keep a trophy file, so keep track of the value you brought every day, every week, or every month. I guess you mentioned week, but you can of course do however you want it. But I think the biggest thing you mentioned, if you want to look into the future, train your AI, build your own GPT, keep track of what you learned from all the experiments, document everything. So keep a master document with briefs, experiments, results, what you learned, train the AI, ask the AI, and you can even ask it what will happen with new experiments you think about running. When you're going to hire your first person, hire somebody with the skill sets for the problem, and hire somebody who's able to explain technical things in normal jargon. Then when we think about growing from 0 to 10K MR, first find one channel and then focus on one channel, and then 10K to 10 million AR. New user onboarding becomes a lot more valuable. It will compound over time. And then implement segmentation, slice and dice your data as much as you can.
That was impressive.
No AI is being used for this. Not yet. Maybe soon.
Very impressive.
Nice. If people want to get in contact with you, Andrew, like I think you're pretty active on LinkedIn. What would be the best way?
LinkedIn is great. Andrew Capland. Follow me on YouTube. I'm starting to experiment a little bit more there. Andrew Capland, spelled the exact same way. And if interested in my work, or you want to check out the Growth OS or anything else I'm up to, deliveringvalue.co.
Love it. It's a really nice domain. We're going to link to that. LinkedIn, I will add the link. We'll add the link to your website, deliveringvalue.co. So not .com, right? Exactly.
Can't afford the .com.
Welcome to Startup Life. Can they also find the growth operating system on the site there?
Yeah, if you go to deliveringvalue.co/OS, it'll redirect you to the right page. You can learn all about my growth operating system. It's available for $497. I think it's pretty reasonable for all the stuff you get to learn and implement in there. It's all in there.
Exactly. It's gonna bring the value back once you implement it.
That's the goal.
Nice. Thanks for coming on. For people listening on Spotify, if you haven't, leave us a review. So give us 5 stars so we can beat the algorithms. And if you listen anywhere, just give us a thumbs up or whatever you can do on the platform. For now, thanks again for coming on, Andrew.
Dude, you got it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching this show of the Grow Your B2B SaaS podcast. You made it till the end, so I think we can assume you like this content. If you did, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you like this content, feel free to reach out if you want to sponsor the show. If you have a specific guest in mind, if you have a specific topic you want us to cover, reach out to me on LinkedIn. More than happy to take a look at it. If you want to know more about Reditus, feel free to reach out as well. But for now, have a great day and good luck growing your B2B SaaS.